Jihad has come to America.
It constitutes the most devastating series of terrorist attacks in history.
The only deen Allah accepts is Al-Islam. And whoever seeks any other deen apart from Islam will never be accepted.
Allahu Akbar! And we stand together to win the war against terrorism.
But you too will make your destruction!
Is Sharia the answer to the problems of the West? It's been called a violent law that potentially undermines Western civilization. It's the Islamic law that allegedly calls for the killing of apostates, the subjugation of infidels, and the oppression of women. A law that's said to support honor killings, encourage the existence of child brides, and whose supposed aim is to control the West through Islam. How then could Sharia be healthy for the West? Is it coming our way? And what type of lifestyle could the West expect if Sharia were to be implemented? Today we'll look into part 2 of the question, would Sharia help the West? Where we'll discuss the very attributes of this Islamic law known as Sharia. If it does in fact support violence, then why isn't the West standing up against the spread and implementation of Sharia in our country? To help us answer these questions, we have 4 experts that join us this evening. Our first guest, we have Pastor Joseph, host of News and Views. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Well, thanks for having me.
We appreciate your presence with us on the show. Thank you so much.
God bless you.
Also with us, we have Sheikh Omar Bakri Muhammad, who joins us this evening live from Lebanon. He's an Islamist militant leader and former judge for the Sharia court in the UK. We also have Sheikh Anjem Chowdhury, who's with us all the way from London, England, a Muslim activist and lecturer at the London School of Sharia, who calls for the implementation of Sharia in Britain. And last but not least, we have Kamal Salim, former PLO terrorist, founder of Qum Ministries and author of The Blood of Lambs. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Welcome to Jihad Exposed on this Tuesday, November 2nd, 2010. I am your host, Summer Goriel. Thank you for tuning in. We look forward to presenting part 2 of the question, would Sharia help the West? Tonight in particular, we will focus on the components of Sharia, the possible violent aspects of it, and we'll see if such a law would help the West or in fact harm the West. Because tonight's question is rather loaded, we'll focus on addressing 3 controversial issues. The first is dealing with someone who converts from Islam. The second is the treatment of a non-Muslim. And the third is regarding gender equality. Then we'll wrap it up and we'll see how these examples would be practically applied to the West today. And then we'll open up the phone lines for you to call in. Our number is 248-416-1300. Before we get into the issues of tonight, Anjem, as a quick recap during our last program, a main point that was brought up on your end is that Islam is the answer, Sharia is the solution to all of the problems of the West. Many of our viewers then could be asking how Sharia could be the answer to the problems of the West if in Islamic countries such as Egypt, Lebanon, Iran, Sudan, and others, we see chaos, and Iraq, we see this sort of continuous chaos. So what type of an example is being set in those countries for the West when there's that perception that even in the house of Islam, even the house of Islam is not in order? So can you help us understand that before we get into our specific topics of this evening?
Yes, good evening. Suddenly, when we look at the Muslim world today, we find that the
I'm sorry, Brother Anjem, if you could just raise your voice, or if we could have your audio raised in the studio so that both Pastor Joseph and I can hear you.
Is that better?
Yeah, they need to raise it
Yeah.
upstairs, I think.
Yeah, if the studio can just raise the audio of Brother Anjem so that we can hear him give his overview.
Is that better?
Okay, Mr. Anjem.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, very lightly.
Yeah. Please do your best to speak as loud as you can.
Okay. Well, I was just saying that suddenly when I look at Muslim countries around the world,
Yeah. Why don't we do this? Why don't we take a 30-second break real quick? We just introduced the topic for you, but we'll take a quick break while the techs get Brother Anjum's audio in line, and then we'll be right back. Just 30 seconds. Stay with us.
Jihad has come to America.
Constitutes the most devastating series of terrorist attacks in history.
The only deen Allah accepts is Al-Islam. And whoever seeks any other deen apart from Islam will never be accepted.
Allahu Akbar! And we stand together to win the war against terrorism.
But you too will make your destruction.
Welcome back to the show, Jihad Exposed. Thank you for your patience. Brother Anjum, if you can go ahead whenever you're ready, the mic's all yours to answer that quick question.
yes, I think if you look at the Muslim community today, globally, one second, there's a lot of interference here. One second, bear with me. What's that noise? Hello?
Yes,
Okay,
we can hear you.
Can you hear me
You're very faint, though.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, is that better?
Yes, much
It
better.
is. Go right ahead.
Okay. I was going to say that if one looks at the Muslim world today, one would undoubtedly find that there are over 55 so-called Muslim countries, and none of them, in fact, implement the Shariah. You know, if you'd ask any Muslim who is judging by the divine text, he will tell you that in all of those countries they are implementing some type of either republican system or, some kind of monarchy system. In fact, the last time we actually had the Sharia implemented as a law and order was before the 3rd of March 1924. So the Islamic State, which is called the Khilafah system of governance, has not in fact been in existence for over 86 years, or about 85, 86 years. That being the case, we do believe, in fact, that oppression is being meted out in those countries because of man-made law. So the foreign policy, the judicial system, the economic system, the social system, the ruling system is all according to the whims and desires of the people who are in charge. And, I must agree that the dictators who are in charge, like Hosni Mubarak and Zardari in Pakistan, and, you can name any of the leaders, they are in many ways even worse than the leaders that we find, for example, in the Western regimes, because, not only are they implementing non-Islamic law, but they are oppressing the people even more than they are doing in some of the Western countries. The people, even if they speak about Islam in some of those nations, they're immediately arrested. You cannot even mention the name of the leader. Whereas there's a little bit more flexibility. But having said that, there is still oppression, the oppression of man-made law, even in Great Britain. So I don't think that you should look at those countries like Saudi Arabia or Sudan or Iran or Iraq as models, because none of them, in fact, are implementing the Sharia. And indeed, this is the main objective of most of these serious Islamic movements around the world. And, for your information, the Islamic State has certain conditions. Number one, the authority needs to be in the hands of the Muslims. Number two, we must be able to secure the people internally and externally, from attack from outside. And number three, the whole of the Sharia must be implemented internally and even as a foreign policy. And indeed, if you look in history, the Islamic State never had in fact, boundaries and borders. It was ever expanding. And in fact, many of the places which today, find a majority Muslim people, like, for example, Abyssinia, which is now Ethiopia, like Indonesia, in fact, embraced Islam and actually wanted the Sharia to be implemented. So how this comes about in the future, Allah only knows, but we work for it. But we do warn you that don't judge Islam by the countries who are, majority Muslim nowadays, the so-called Muslim countries, because they all implement the same as what you're implementing in America and in Britain, which is man-made law.
Okay, thank you, Anjem. Let's have Kamal respond to that. And also, Kamal, if you can give us from a non-Muslim's point of view why you believe this topic is important for our audience, whether a Muslim or a non-Muslim, to listen in to this type of a topic.
Well, this is very important to really to see for yourself. Even the country that they declare probably to implement Sharia law is Saudi Arabia. Even Saudi Arabia today, the kings themselves, they don't live. They're hypocrites in their very way of living. And those countries that they are implementing Sharia today, they are in fact attacking the non-Muslim nation and murdering a great amount of people by the hundreds of thousands, and some instance by the millions, like Sudan, for example. And you see what's happening over there. That Sharia law in itself, it's hypocrisy, because even the people who abide in it do not abide in it, and what it says, it's not really done. Even between schools of Islam, from one school to another, it differs and changes, whether Sharia between Sunni and Shia, but then between the schools of Islam themselves, there's 4 schools of Islam, and each one differ with the other one. So therefore, when it comes to putting Sharia law, the Muslim will kill theirself, and we've seen it happening even in the past when Islam was supreme at one time. So therefore, how can we bring something is not even perfect to replace a society? There's no place in the world that is perfect today. I mean, when you look at the Western society, what Anjem said, we're here to replace, homosexuality, Hollywood, with what? And what is better? You got to bring something tangible to more that it's doable, that it showed something, from its infrastructure, it's holy. But rather, even Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, he was a warlord himself, killing non-Muslim. And even the Islam by itself, it does not talk about jihad as jihad. It talks about futuhat al-Islamiyya, which is about the attack in the non-Muslim countries. So how could you bring something 6th century belief to replace a modern society to say we brought you something better? And this is what everybody needs to understand.
And with that, I want to remind our viewers that today we want to touch on 3 areas, 3 controversial issues in Islam. Number 1, the treatment of a non-Muslim. Number 2, if a Muslim were to want to leave Islam, what does Islam call to do to that person? And number 3, how women are treated, so gender equality. So my first question, maybe to Pastor Joseph, you can help us understand. Yes. It's regarding what Islam instructs about a Muslim convert, also known as an apostate. Why don't you sort of give us an insight on what Islam teaches about that?
Well, it's very well established in the 4 legal schools in Islam that irtidad, an apostate, ever since the 7th century up until the 19th century, he should be killed. If he does not revert to Islam, he should be killed. We see this manifest all over the world. Jesus said, you'll know a tree by its fruits, and the fruits are there. But we don't just judge the tree by its fruits, we judge it by its roots. And the roots of the tree can be found in the Quran and the Hadith. And can I have a moment to take a quick look at that? Remember Anjem said last time, oh, you guys keep talking about things, but you never quote anything. Well, let's take a look at your Quran and look at your Hadith very quickly. Surah Al-Tawbah, Surah 9. Most Islamic scholars would say that Surah 9 was of the last chronologically sent down to Muhammad, supposedly, and therefore, if there is a doctrine of abrogation, which most Muslims would agree that there are, although some practicing taqiyya would deny it for their own purposes, but if there is a doctrine of abrogation, this would abrogate and nullify verses like there's no compulsion in religion, you have your religion, I'll have my religion. All of that was in the time of Mecca. These are Medinan surahs. So Surah Al-Tawbah, we find after the famous verse, Surah 9:5, which says, kill the unbelievers wherever you find them. kill them. It says, and then in Surah 929, of course, it talks about fighting the people of the book. But in between the two, it talks about a certain group of people who were the enemies of Muslims, who had treaties with the Muslims, but then turned away. Let's take a quick look in the Quran, Surah 9, verse